Okay.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Stories of a Colorful World, author conversations with Irene Smalls, author of over a dozen children's books. And we are so excited to have her here. Irene, can you just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I grew up in Harlem, New York, and I grew up under segregation. And so one of the things that I always noticed was that our reader was Fun with Dick and Jane. And I don't know, some of you may not be familiar with Fun with Dick and Jane. We're two children with blonde hair and blue eyes, and they lived in the suburbs in a house with a white picket fence and a white house. And I was like, wait a minute, I live in the middle of Harlem. It's 98% Black. And it's just not the environment and the people that I knew. And I grew up, being raised by my grandmother and, the extended family. And so it was very much in Harlem, when I grew up in the 50s, was very much a Southern town. I mean, people spoke, I actually grew up with a Southern accent because my whole family had a Southern accent because they had just come from the South, And it was years before I lost my Southern accent. And the, just the warmth, the love, the sense of, and again, when I talk about Harlem when we didn't lock our doors, which there was no crime, there were no drugs. The streets were so clean. Every Saturday morning, my grandmother and other grandmothers would get down on their knees and scrub the sidewalks and the foyer lobby of the building, the steps with bleach water. So it was just this community that I didn't see reflected in the books that I was given as part of New York City Board of Education standard issue. And the luck that I had, the great fortune, was I had a kindergarten teacher, Miss Loretta Abbott. And Miss Loretta Abbott, by herself, had a class of 35-year-olds. If you only think about 5-year-olds, they're totally free. They do whatever comes in their mind at any particular moment. And and they're very egocentric. It's like they think, well, I want to do this, so that's perfectly fine. And so my kindergarten teacher, not only did she bring in the Black poets, Paul Laurence Dunbar with Little Brown Baby, but she also brought in County Cullen, and she also choreographed the entire kindergarten curriculum, which to me was a revelation because I thought everybody danced through kindergarten.
Some people still think that.
Well, it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. I had a great time in kindergarten.
So you're the author of over a dozen children's books, but have you always aspired to be a writer?
I never wanted to be a writer. And as a matter of fact, I was told all my life I was a terrible writer. Yeah. So I've always, really had this innate fear of writing. But about 20, 25 years ago, I had lost my job and I had a baby, I had a mortgage, I had all these bills to pay, and I had no money. And I'm like, oh, this is not good. And I was reading the paper and there was an article in the Boston Globe, and it talked about Little Brown, and Little Brown was having their 100th anniversary. And it talked about the grand old publisher and the grand old this, the grand old that. And I said to myself, there's a job. I'll call up Little Brown and I'll tell them that I'm a writer and they need to publish my book. It made perfect sense at the time. So I didn't know anybody at Little Brown. I didn't know anybody in publishing. As a matter of fact, I've been told I was a terrible writer. But in the article, they mentioned the president of the company. So I thought, well, okay. I'll talk to the president. So I called up, looked up the number in the phone book, and I called up and I said, I'd like to speak to the president of Little Brown. And the receptionist said, you would? I said, yes. She said, fine. So she put me in, transferred me, and this man picks up the phone. He says, President of Little Brown. I said, well, my name is Irene Smalls, and I'm a fabulous writer, and you need to publish my book. And he said, okay.
Wow.
And I said, okay. I didn't expect that because let's say I was less than secure about my writing ability, but I needed a job. And this seemed like a job possibility. And the motivation of children is something that pushes a lot of people forward.
Absolutely.
And so I went down to, my daughter's name was Dawn, and I was so excited about having a baby, my first baby. And so her name was Dawn. I wrote poetry to dawn at dawn, to dawn, dawning at dawn, 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 dawn. Just to say, my poetry was a little suspect, but I believed in it fervently. So I go down to Little Brown and I, go into the meeting, the president's office up on the top floor, and I'm very, hi, nice to meet you, glad to be here. And he said, well, let's see your work. And so I pulled out these dawn poems, and I read him my dawn poems, and he looked at me and said, that's the worst stuff I've ever heard. And I was so embarrassed. I was totally humiliated. And I really wanted to cry, but I said to myself, no good girl from 147th Street, 8th Avenue is gonna stand in the middle of anybody's floor and cry. So girl, you better do something. So I just started talking. I made up a lot of stuff. Anything that came into my head, I said it. One of the things I did say was that when I grew up in Harlem, the streets were so clear and so clean that you could find a gray nickel on the gray concrete because there was no bottle caps, no graffiti, no newspapers, nothing. You could eat off those streets. And he said, oh, that's interesting. I said, oh, that's my story idea. And so that's how my first book, Irene the Big Fine Nickel, got started.
Wow.
So it was, shall we say, nervousness and just, I'm not going to leave until I walk out of here with a shred of human dignity. That's what
Absolutely. And what a great start to a long career in children's books.
Well, it really said to me, because at the time, Little Brown didn't have any Black authors. They had white authors who were writing about Black people. And I'm like, no, I think they're missing a lot in the translation, okay? So I was really committed once I saw that to really kind of writing stories that were real about Black people being Black people. I mean, we're good, we're bad, we're indifferent, we're a lot of things, but we're 360 degrees of the human experience.
Right. I think that's one of the things that you notice across your writing, right? You have so many books that I'm fond of, and many of them, like Kevin and his dad or Jonathan and his mom, My Nana and Me, they all show like the beauty and the expressiveness of like family and community.
Yes, and they come from small moments. I mean, there's nothing terribly outrageously wonderful about Kevin and his dad cleaning up the house.
Right.
Sounds very ordinary, sounds very simple, but there's so much. It's the subtext, it's the bonding, it's the playfulness, the reinforcement, the setting of role models. It's also reinforcing one's position in the family. There's so much that goes on in day-to-day interactions in a family that means so much in terms of a child's development.
Absolutely. I think still today, there still is so much room that should be made for the simplicity of the everyday experience, where it's like every story doesn't have to be about hair, or does it have to be about a struggle, or does it have to be about, the trauma of Blackness, so to speak.
Yeah. Zora Neale Hurston said, didn't she have a quote about, she says, I'm sorry, but I'm not tragically Black.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm busy sharpening my hunting knife. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I paraphrased. I don't think she said, but that was the essence of what she was saying is, look, I'm about living and creating and doing what I have to do. So if you want to be tragic, go ahead, but that's not what I want to do.
Absolutely. Do those experiences that you write about, those ideas come from your own experiences or experiences of others?
No, really from my own experience. Because I mean, one day Kevin, his dad, was folding laundry and I said, oh, and all of a sudden, I mean, it's almost like they became silhouettes.
Right.
And I saw all this stuff going on. And that's really where the story came from. And Jonathan, his mommy, was because I had a, 5-year-old boy who wouldn't keep still, and I was always chasing him. And I remembered the lessons of kindergarten because my kindergarten teacher never said no, she never said don't, and she never said stop. And she had 30 human beings literally hell-bent on going their own direction. And so what she said was, let's play a game. And so we were like, ooh, we like games. And she was saying, okay, well, the rules of the game are, and so our lessons became the rules of the game. It was just, I mean, she'd have us traipsing around the room, and we had a little skirt we put on for spelling, and then we had a hat we put on for math, and we had but she orchestrated and created this creative environment where we were so enthused that we thought we were doing what we wanted to do. guess what? We were learning that curriculum. That's what we were doing.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the sign of a great teacher, where you're learning when it doesn't feel like work.
Most definitely. And years later, I was watching Channel 2, PBS, and I said, oh, there's my kindergarten teacher.
Oh, wow.
She was a professional dancer. And because she couldn't get work as a dancer, she got her teacher's license. And that's why she literally choreographed the entire curriculum. And I was like, that's what happened. I had a dancer teacher.
Do you have any, I know no author wants to single out a book to say, like, this is my favorite, but are there is there any one book that kind of connects with you or feels more meaningful in a way, maybe in the time that you wrote it, than maybe some of one of the others?
Well, the thing is that the books that I've written, they're old. I mean, they were written many years ago, but the book that's in my head that I'm struggling to just sort of give birth to. And, I always say, I always thought for years, well, I'm not really a writer. I just happen to be writing some stories and publishing a few things. But what I realized is that as an artist, you get captured. Who was it? Somebody said that all the books in all the world have already been written. And what happens is a book chooses you.
Right.
To come into physical manifestation. And, every now and then I get captured. And so I'm like, I don't want to be captured. I don't want to find somebody else. But it doesn't. And so it stays with you. And so that's really where the passion is. That's really, you just, absolutely, it's not a voluntary thing. It's an involuntary where you're captured. And until you give this concept, this idea, physical form, and it leaves you after that. It really does. But it becomes an obsession, until you give birth to it. And then it's like, okay, thanks a lot, bye.
Once it comes into the world,
it's on its own, and you are free to go about your business. Thank you. Finally, I can have my life back, like having a baby.
Absolutely. What do you hope kids take away from your books?
Well, I think, again, Zora Neale Hurston, I guess, this comes to mind because she was so incredibly brilliant. She talks about roots and wings, about how you want them to be grounded in terms of who they are, how important they are, how special they are. And you want to give them the wings to go out into the world and to establish themselves as people, artists, business people, whatever. But they've got those solid roots. They're grounded. That's what Harlem did for me. I had a grounding, and forever, in all eternity, I'll be a girl from 147th Street, 8th Avenue.
It just feels like there's an energy in Harlem that gives birth to so much, even still today.
Most definitely. And how green was my valley. I had no idea that this was special. I'm like, hey, everybody lives like this. Everybody nothing ever happens to me. My life is so boring. And you realize, wow, that was great. You had no concept about how people, and again, the children belong to everybody in the neighborhood. So anybody could spank you, anybody could feed you, anybody could clothe you. If you were where you were somewhere you weren't supposed to be, there was somebody who's going to grab your butt and bring you home and tell your mother. So it was just this sense of, these are all our children. You all belong to us, and we take full responsibility. And I guess the thing that I enjoyed so much about Black men is that Black men were fully faceted. They cooked, they cleaned, they diapered, they went out and caroused and, chased women and did all those things, but it was all part of it. And, took full, when I grew up, most Black families were two parents. The idea of the single parent Black family arose around the 60s. And it was like, it totally reversed. 75% of Black families had two parents. And within 20 years, 30 years, most Black families, or a large percentage, had single women at the head of household.
Right.
And it was like, wow.
And there's something about that you lose in that community that you talked about, just in terms of everybody is responsible for everyone.
Most definitely. And again, you know, there are some women, my grandmother always said, there's some women who know how to raise boys, there's some women who know how to raise girls. And I think a lot of the translation has been that a lot of our boys have not had men, you know, real men in their lives. And we're talking fully faceted men, you know, cut you in a minute, you know, and spank the baby who was going out of the way or whatever. I mean, but it was all done out of a sense of connectiveness. Because in my tenement building, because I grew up in the tenements, literally it was a family. Every floor there was a family member. Mm-hmm. And so we played hide and seek in and out of people's apartments. You come in and you find 3 kids hiding under your kitchen table. You paid no mind, absolutely no mind, went on about your business, did what you had to do, left out or whatever. And that was the way it was. You know, it was a community.
Right. And that is the bond that kind of connects us.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely.
A lot of us are missing right now.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when I grew up on Saturday mornings, we had the kitchen table. Black women all around the neighborhood would gather in kitchen tables in each building and get their hair did for Sunday church. And in those Saturday morning kitchen table conversations, I mean, you heard all the gossip. You learned about finance, how to handle your money. You learned about men. You learned about your skin. You learned about your hair. The beauty care tips that were passed on. I mean, the things that I was taught as a little girl in Harlem that I still do today.
Right.
So there was just this whole socialization process. I mean, Black women have had to socialize themselves out of necessity because society was not telling us we're beautiful. Right. But in those Saturday morning conversations, you had older Black women who said, well, you got good hair, you got good teeth, and you can make it. So I mean, that was a real seal of approval.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can't go wrong.
No, you can't.
So it kind of feels, just in terms of where we are right now, in a place where it seems like there's more transparency around equitability in the publishing world. So really around pay, there are kind of like these pushes around representation and who's representing and able to write in the same way that you said, Little Brown, there are a lot of authors, white authors, who are writing these brown characters, but where were the Black authors? Right. And so there seems to be some action now in a positive direction. What does that representation, or what does diverse representation in children's books kind of mean to you?
Well, what it means, it's so funny because literally 20 years ago, Little Brown, I was the only Black author they had. And so I said, oh, we need more Black authors. And so I went and I recruited people, in terms of just trying to find people interested in publishing. And those people looked at me like I had 10 heads. I mean, of course, they said they wanted more Black people, but no, they really didn't. And I think that, in terms of this it seems to be a real effort now, a real concern and recognition that, we can't have a just society. A little boy asked me once on a school visit, he said, why did white people do everything? And I said, baby, white people didn't do everything. White people wrote the books and they only put themselves in the books. But there were a lot of different kinds of people who contributed, who were brave, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, that question stuck me. And so, that this little boy, that's what he thought. And that's what he honestly believed. And if I was not only going to represent myself, I had to represent, the other folks who came before me. So I think the movement and the push is important, but I think that we've got to think strategically. And for me, I think it's important that we get into, because for a long time, publishers wanted books about slavery. And let's face it, Black people didn't win at slavery, okay? And they love books about Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. They love Frederick Douglass. They love these books that focus on slavery, but where are the Black Wall Street books? Where are the books that talk about, the inventor of so many uses of the peanut? I mean, inventiveness, talked about McCoy, the Black inventor and the things like that, to show Black ingenuity and Black creativity. And, the whole thing is I learned more about Black history from August Wilson and his plays than I ever did in school. Because that whole transition from the ending of slavery, Reconstruction with its very positive things, and then the rollback, and then what happened to, it was like this whole gap. And then when you looked at history, I mean, you're horrified. You look at the Black Code, you look at the, reintroduction of, the penal colony, for free labor and all this other kind of stuff. And I think we need to tell the whole story. We need to tell, so our children have the ability to see, oh, that's what happened. That's why, Black people, the wealth, because there was the thing about Black people who own land in the South. And, the number of Black people who own land is getting smaller and smaller because so much land was taken back by, shall we say, various means. And so it's just, I think that representation is important, but we need to have people who are willing to face kind of the ugly parts as well as the traditional parts and make new parts. And I think that's the piece that I'm so excited about, bridging the gap to technology, because I think technology it's it. If it wasn't for Zoom, where would we be?
Right.
I mean, we would be in our silos, in our apartments, in our homes, lonely and depressed. And so because of technology, we've been able to connect. And I think we've got to make sure that our children understand and relate and see their role in it. And so to me, that's part of it. It's to tell the past, to flesh out, the transitions, and also to move children forward to where they should go. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Have you noticed any differences between the start of your career to now?
Well, I have. I've seen more authors come out, and I'm really excited about that and doing some very exciting things. Awesome. And so I really, I'm very hopeful. But I guess who is it? Rosa Guy. Have you ever heard of Rosa Guy?
No.
Rosa Guy is one of the most unbelievable writers I have ever read, Black writer. You have to read Rosa Guy. And she wrote, she wrote these novels, short novels for kids.
Okay.
And I guess the thing I enjoyed, made me so, and she lives in Harlem. I don't know if she's still alive, but actually a friend of mine knew her, grew up on her block. Okay. And, and she was an author who was, excellent. Some of the best stuff I've ever read. And she was gone. And I was like, how can talent like that, anyone let it go?
Right.
And so I want to say that in terms of our present in publishing, we need to republish Rosa Guy novels. I read everything she had and I was mad because there was no more. And, but Sister Soldier is someone who, shall we say, a different genre with the hip hop and the other stuff, who tells those kinds of stories, those kinds of fully faceted stories where human beings reacting in human situations, that kind of thing. So I think that it's a matter of putting together all of our pieces, our past, our transitions, our present, and looking toward that future, because believe me, the future is coming.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before we even know it. Do you have any advice for aspiring writers?
What I would say, the thing is, when I started in publishing, I literally just called the guy up and said, hey, bring it out. And I told him he was good looking that day. Yes, I did. And so there are lots of, and you can't do that today because you have an assistant, you have a secretary, you have, they have these college students who read manuscripts, and most publishers don't take unsolicited. What I would say is you really have to say to yourself, why should this story be written and why am I to tell it? And understand that it's part craft, but it's also an art form. Right. And, I read a quote once and it said, writing is easy, just dip the pen in your blood Start to write. Because when it comes, it's art from the heart. When you start pulling out pieces of yourself, pieces you don't particularly want to see sometimes,
Right.
you know, and put it on that page, that's when it becomes universal. That's when it gets exciting because people can understand it and feel it. So I think that those are the kind of hard questions. I'd say it's a craft. So you have to, you know, take the writing classes, get the critiques, get a lot of rejections. I get rejected all the time. But if you're committed to your idea, it's not so much about waiting for, like, how many rejections were there for Harry Potter?
Right.
You know, keep that in mind, that if it's an idea that's really important enough and have something to share with another human being, then you should persist. So go to conferences, take the classes, go to critique groups, get lots of input from someone not in your family, not your friends, and not your boyfriend or girlfriend. And you don't want to hurt your feelings. Think, oh, it's great. It's great. You know, and understand that most writers write badly in the beginning, and that writing is a process of rewriting, rethinking.
Right.
You know, and, you know, sort of saying, oh, Lord, how could anybody write something so horrible? Oh, I hate it. And then a week later you said, well, there are 3 sentences I can keep.
Right.
You know, you know, just go through that process. And from that process, you know, you produce the books, the art.
Which takes so much like vulnerability and, you know, putting yourself out there and trying again. I see it even with like young kids in their writing, where they're like, okay, I did this first draft, I'm done with it. It's like,
oh, you're so nice.
over.
I know. They have no idea how much time and effort professional writers or people who write for a living put into their work. And it takes years. I mean, who was it? I forgot. Lucille Clifton had said, you know, that there were books that she has been working on for years and she hasn't been able to get published. So it's a process. And understand that, you know, not everyone's going to like your work. It may not be the right person for your work. They don't have the ability to see. And as a writer, you find someone who believes in you, believes in your gift, and is willing to help nurture it, and so on and so forth. Because in the old days, editors edited. These days, they don't. You have to present pretty much 98% of what that book is supposed to be, because editors they're pressed for time. And publishing is not defined just by an editor. It's now defined by a publishing committee. You have sales, you have marketing, you have all these other people who have input on which books get published. Right. So you have to keep a business head too, in terms of your potential market, you know, who has written books like you before, is your book similar, you know, all these other kinds of things. So I'm saying you have to have the art part, but you have to have the business part too now.
How has that kind of like transition to having both of those pieces been as you thought about your career?
Well, I guess I have a master's in business, and so I have the basics, and so it's not like it's I know it.
Right.
You know, I don't always use it, but I'm more an artist. I am a business person. I should have gone to art school instead of business school, but that was another time. And so I think it's just something you need to be aware of. That book proposals include marketing numbers and, you know, projections and all that other kind of stuff, because that's what that pub committee, and an editor can feel passionate about a book, but if the numbers don't work, they don't publish. If it doesn't make money. And the thing is that people think, oh, I published a book, I got an advance, and advance is a loan.
Right.
You don't have to pay it back. But if that book does not pay out its advance, you're not getting published by that publisher again. Because they lost money. They gave you money, and that book didn't pay back the advance. So, hey, you know, why should they take another chance on you? I mean, it's interesting because when my first book came out, I was so excited. I'm like, oh, wow, Irene and the Big Fine Nickel. And so I'm thinking, oh, great, I've got a whole writing career and all this other stuff. So I went down to talk to the editor, and I said, well, what's the publicity tour like? And, you know, what advertising are you going to do? And blah, blah, blah. I wanted, you know, a sense of it. And he said, we're not doing anything. I said, what? He said, no, first books by unknown authors don't sell very well.
Mm.
And nobody knows who you are. So, I mean, why should they buy your book? And I said, but how are they going to know that I wrote a book if there's no advertising, if there's no book tour? He said, well, we'll just see what happens.
Wow.
And then I realized that I was a token, that it wasn't, and I said, okay, I got it. I have to fix this. And it just so happened that I lived in Boston across the street from the world headquarters of the Gillette company.
Okay.
And so I don't know why I decided to go to Gillette. I don't know why. I guess because it was across the street. I mean, you get my marketing approach here. I'm reading it in the newspaper. The company is across the street. Oh, I'll go over there. I'm really insightful. Lots of, shall we say, in-depth research goes into these issues, right? And so I go over to the Gillette company. And I said, well, I have a book and understand this is a shaving company.
Right. And
I'm going over there with a Black children's book. And so, I mean, it doesn't seem to connect, on the surface. But
right.
I'd go across the street. I was going grocery shopping anyway. It was on my way. So I thought, hey, what the heck? Let me go. If it doesn't work out, I'll finish my grocery shopping. I'll come home. I'm good to go. And so it just so happened that Gillette had just bought a Black hair care company. They had just bought Lustre Silk.
Oh, wow.
And so they said, why don't we let you talk to the Lustre Silk manager? I said, sure, I'm game, hey. And they were looking, they had a promotion, and the promotion was reading is fun. And here I am, the only person standing in the lobby, in the office rather, with a book, and Lustre Silk is a Black hair care company, and I got a Black book. Right. And they're like, hey, and they sent me on a book tour. They took out ads in Ebony and Jet. They hired me an assistant. I had a limo. It was fabulous. And they paid me a stipend. I was like, hey, doesn't get any better than this for a first book, right? Wow. It was the funniest thing. I mean, I still to this day say, why would I ever go to a shaving company with my husband? I didn't know they had bought Lustre Silk. I swear I didn't. Wow. And so it was wonderful. So immediately, I think they printed 5,000 books, 5,000 copies of my first book. And so Gillette bought them all. They told me they were going to buy them all. And so I called up my editor and said, I just want to let you know that I got this promotion with Gillette, and they're going to buy 5,000 books and send me on a tour. My editor said, really, Irene? So we've been here for 100 years. We've never done business with Gillette. And yeah. Okay, well, I got to go. The books are being published. You're good. Bye. Wow. And I was like, well, wait a minute. And he was gone. And I was like, but wait a minute. And so anyway, Gillette sent them a check for 5,000 books. Wow. And you know what I did though? My big mistake was in negotiating my contract. And again, we got to talk business here because publishing is a business. I didn't negotiate a percentage for promotions that I initiated. I got next to nothing from that promotion because again, it was considered special sales, and special sales are really flukes. I mean, they're odd things that just happen. And so after I had kind of put it together and, I was going on the book tour and stuff like that, I got not even pennies on the dollar. Wow. And so it was a word to the wise. So for soon to be published authors out there, take a good look at your contracts, do some research on your contracts, understand what those clauses mean, because at least half of that money should have been mine, because of course it's after the costs are covered. Right. But Gillette got a real nice bonus. Right. My grocery shopping.
If that is not a living testimony to like what is yours, just being in that place, and when all of those things came together, that was truly just for you.
As I said, I keep saying, why did I go to Gillette? I mean, at the time, it made perfect sense. Everything made perfect sense at the time. But if anyone had said to me, why are you doing this? I'd say, oh, because, it has been interesting, very interesting. And I've always been a very proactive author. An important part of publishing now is you got to have an audience, social media, which is like, shall we say, Greek to me, but I'm learning. And so I had to always think of ways to be, a promotional ideas. Like I did I came up with a line of, every book that I've written has the dedication, I love you, Black child. Notice it has, I love you, Black child. And so I said, well, I'll put that on t-shirts. So then I decided to sell that to the Army, because I felt there are a lot of Black people in the Army, right? So Irene gets herself a ticket to, where would I go in Arkansas? Someplace in Arkansas. I mean, let's just say, I don't know where these ideas come from. And I went to the Army Air Force Exchange to sell them my promotional t-shirts. I love you, Black woman. I love you, Black man. I love you, Black child. And I sat down with a group of buyers and explained what I was doing and, blah, blah, blah. And they bought it.
Wow.
I had a contract. I said, how did you think of that one, Irene? I wasn't sure, but it worked out for a while. It was fun.
Oh, I love that.
Definitely fun. But I'm saying, for any would-be authors, think about your numbers. You need social media. Think about, how you're going to promote and market your book. Think about what social networks you're a part of. Because if you're a Delta, if you're an AKA, these are things that a publisher will pay attention to, because everything is so fractionated. It's not like before, where you had the major bookstores and, the traditional media. Now it's, TikTok, it's Instagram, it's Facebook, it's, YouTube, it's all of these things. So you've got to have a built-in audience to say, they're going to buy my book and here's why. Right.
Already coming to them as a brand.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. It's got to be a brand.
Absolutely.
Most definitely.
So are there any must-have children's books that you had to have in your house with your kids, or that you've come across recently that you've just fallen in love with? Well, I think the new book by hold on one second, let me go get it, because I've fallen in love with it. Okay. Oh, yes. I love this book. I mean, this book is art. It is just pure art and soul and heart. I bought this for my grandson and I've held on to it, but it's his birthday, September 22nd. So guess what? I cried. Maybe I'll buy another copy, but we won't talk about it. I love that book. And there was a book about Ida Wells Barnett. That woman is my ideal forever human being. The things that she did by herself, just blew me away. I mean, went down in the South to document lynching by herself. Would go into the all-white car and sit down and fight by herself. I mean, I just think that, wow. Every little girl should know about Ida Wells Barnett. Absolutely. And Zora Neale Hurston, of course, and also Paul Laurence Dunbar, the Black poets, the poets that my kindergarten teacher brought in are just, forever favorites. Absolutely. Oh, I love that. Did your family have any like Storytime rituals? None at all. None at all. It was interesting. The transition between my grandmother's generation and my mother's generation, because my grandmother fervently believed in education. She was the one that really pushed me to read, pushed me to go to the library. My mother was indifferent for the most part. So there were no Storytime rituals because my grandmother had a second grade education. She didn't know how to read. Right.
But she pushed me to read and made sure I went to the library. And so I really kind of give all honor and all respect to her for really kind of creating in me that drive to read and to learn and to go to school.
Absolutely. Which then you're able to share with so many others.
Yes, most definitely. And Nana and Me is dedicated to my grandmother, Louise Godfrey McNeil.
That is it. And such a beautiful story. I definitely love both Nana and Me and Pop
and Me and Recipe. Yes.
Just the love that you feel from the grandparents towards their grandchildren. And we were talking about this week, we've really been with Grandparents' Day last Sunday.
Yes.
Really celebrating and honoring grandparents all week. And so those have definitely been two of our favorites that we've been talking about during this week. Are you reading any good books personally right now?
Well, I'm finishing up Becoming, adult books, Michelle Obama's book. And I guess I'm really struck by how honest and how Southside girl she is. I mean, really a down sister. I didn't expect for her to be a down sister, but my girl, who was it? This friend of mine tells a story about Michelle and from Chicago. And it was when Obama was running for something. And a friend wanted to volunteer for the campaign. So she had the number, they gave it to her to call the house. And Michelle Obama answered, said, "Tell Obama to bring his butt home." And I scared the little girl so much. She didn't know what to say. This woman was like, "No. Tell my husband to bring his butt home. He got kids, And it was just like, but in that, in her book Becoming, you see that real Black woman, but owning all of it, the beauty of it all. And I think that, she talked about how the angry Black woman, we've been miscategorized. And that's really a strength because that expresses our voice and our feelings and our reaction to kind of the things, the pressures and things that have been placed upon us in so many ways.
Absolutely. I definitely loved her book. I feel like I need to read it again.
Most definitely.
I know she has a new podcast out too.
Yes, most definitely.
I haven't been able to check it out, but I definitely loved it because it really did show like her authenticity. And, she owns who she is and loves every part of it. And, you can also see she shared her growth along the way.
And the fact that, the White House didn't really change her.
Right.
She was very aware of, shall we say, the dynamics of it all, the grandeur, and, she enjoyed all of that, but it also talked about how she just wanted to go outside, wanted to go to a store, and she couldn't do that. And to do that, be that way for 8 years.
Right.
That's a long time. It's a price that you pay.
Right. It is definitely great responsibility to hold that, through all of those years, knowing, especially with all the attacks and, just everything coming. So it takes a lot. It takes a very special person.
Yeah. And I love the story she talked about going to see Obama and his car had she could see the pavement and she's like,
right.
Don't look down. She said, I already had. You're like, that doesn't give you the best feeling. You're driving along with the guy.
Right.
Like, wait a minute.
Where you wanna?
I know.
But it definitely has been a transition.
And, in terms of grandparents, the importance of grandparents, particularly in communities of color, because I believe the last statistic I saw that 25% of Black families are being raised by grandparents.
Right.
So they have an outsized role in communities of color. And so Grandparents' Day is really, really important that we recognize and we appreciate the great, great gift that they give us. Absolutely. That continuity of culture and love that really sustains a lot of children today.
Absolutely. especially doing, I know we talked a lot this week just around like the how difficult it's been through these last few months, having like limited connectedness to grandparents, not being able to, you know, in some cases see them in person, or to only be able to connect with them through, you know, Zoom, FaceTime, you know, calls, things like that. But, you know, that connectedness and that relationship really being able to have them there in that closeness during this time when so many things have changed.
And we really need that. You know, and particularly grandmothers. I mean, you know, you raised a couple of kids, you've been around the block a few times, you know, that cry means this, that cry means they're hungry, that cry means they're annoyed, that cry means there's a serious something, you got to pay attention to that. And, you know, that kind of experience that, you know, parents need, you know, because and when I grew up, nobody raised their kids themselves. You had this extended family of grandparents, aunts, uncles, neighbors who helped you, the village raise the child.
Absolutely.
And that was just understood, but the village has shrunk. I mean, it's like, you know, some poor girl and a guy, you know, who are trying to raise these kids, and like, it wasn't like that, you know, so it's much, much harder today.
Right. And parents are, you know, are being stretched thin with working from home, kids going to school virtually, and trying to find some type of balance.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Yeah. It's so important that we, you know, recognize that there are wells and resources that, you know, and again, our older Black parents, they've been through a lot. They've seen a lot. They may not talk about it all, because my grandma never talked about how she grew up in the South. And, you know, it was amazing because I realized I was born in New York, but my whole family came from Charleston, South Carolina, from the area. I want to tell you the story of, they said they were from Charleston. I go back, they were from the little small bitty towns, the rural towns. They tried to make themselves, I'm from the big city. They weren't from Charleston. Had me believing my whole life my family was from Charleston. But
you know, you come to New York, you have to reinvent yourself.
I know, they definitely talking about they came from Charleston. Okay. To go back there and, you know, to really hear the stories and see, I realized the horror and the terror that they left. That's why they never talked about it. Mm-hmm. They never referenced their life in the South in terms of what they had seen and gone through and all of that. They were about pushing those babies forward.
Absolutely. And creating a better tomorrow.
Oh, most definitely.
So I want to thank you so much for joining me today. How can people stay connected with you?
Well, I'm on Instagram at the Grandma Diva 1, and I post a variety of things. Sometimes it's inspirational sayings. Sometimes I also love clothes, because in the 50s, Black people dressed their behinds off. I mean, every day Black women walked out with gloves, handbag, a hat, you know, dress, pantyhose, pumps. And of course, everything was coordinated. And they were going to their jobs as maids and scrub women. But that was the pride that Black women had. I mean, they were gorgeous, and skin and hair, like you think about, I think about those women, and they were just flawless. And as I said, going to be someone's maid, but they knew who they were. Right. You know, there's a poem by Warren Cooney written in 1936. She does not know her beauty. She thinks her brown body has no glory, but if she could have danced naked under the palm trees and seen her image in the river, then she would know. But there are no palm trees on the street, and dishwater gives back no images. Wow. And so the Harlem that I grew up in, there were all these images of these, you know, stylish Black women. So on my Instagram, the Grandma Diva 1, are all these fashions and clothes, because I still love, you know, pretty clothes and all of that, but also sayings and, you know, things about my family from time to time. So it's very much a personal kind of endeavor in terms of social media. I'm learning social media.
I was about to say, you keep saying that you don't know social media, but your Instagram is fabulous.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Because I'm having fun. You know, I'm really, and again, as I said, when I grew up in Harlem, I mean, Black people were active and, you know, physical and so on and so forth. So lots of my videos are moving around and doing all kinds of stuff like that because that's who we were as a people. We were energetic. And I loved that you know, there would be people singing on the street, playing music on the street, because that's just what it was. Music was part of who we were as a people. And everybody would start dancing. I mean, that's what we do. And literally nobody would blink because everybody made me dancing too, you know? And it was just, so I'll be dancing a lot. That's all I got to say.
And we'll make sure to drop the link in the chat so everyone can go to it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, again, I'm so excited to have a chance to share, to talk about, you know, the books that I've written and the journey of being an artist and a writer. And I want to encourage the young people out there, the artists out there, to share your story, to talk about your life, because everyone is unique. Everyone has something special to offer. I mean, you and I could write the same thing about the same topic and it'd be totally different, because it's based on who we are and how we are. And so I would say share and stay healthy, stay safe, and enjoy your life.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. It's definitely been a pleasure speaking with you today. And I can't wait until you birth that idea that's stuck in your head right now.
It's stuck in my head, my body, my elbows. This one is going to be a big one, you know, it's giving me the hardest time. But I think it's worthwhile because as I said, we've got to give our kids roots and wings whenever we think about it. And I resist the whole scenario of Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, you know, Martin Luther King, the 5 people that they want you to write about in slavery.
Absolutely.
You know, white people, we know about slavery.
Absolutely.
Our families have lived through it. And there are enough books about slavery. And I'm not even going to put down anybody who's writing it. I think it's wonderful you have a new approach on it, but we didn't win. Let's talk about the win. There were times that we won. There were times that we did, you know, but again, they're buried. And so we need to unearth all those gems from our history, from our culture, and share those.
Absolutely. And look to the future as well.
As well, most definitely. Well, I want to commend you and what you're doing in the work, because this is so important.
Thank you so much.
Happy to get your email and say, wow, look at her.
We are definitely trying to do what we can in this space just to continue to push our own voices and other voices of authors who are putting work out and gets lost in
so much. Right. And then some authors who are artists, who are pure artists, who don't think about the business at all. They're so intense in their art. And so your service that you're providing is so important because you can take that art and share it with the world.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully our part makes some difference to someone.
Yes, most definitely. It's very important. And I commend you and I thank you for it.
Thank you so much. All right. So we'll make sure that we put information to get in touch with Irene Smalls in the chat, and see you next week.
Okay. Thank you. Goodbye.